Ho, ho! Merry Christmas, everybody! Have a wonderful time. Hi, folks, and welcome back. Growing up, the Saturday afternoon matinee on either BBC Two or ITV was the thing. If it was a good film, that is. Never was a great fan of boring, lovey-dovey films. Nor did I always understand the movie fully. But my favourites were always a good war movie. Normally played out afterwards on my bedroom carpet, and then hours spent re-gluing broken Airfix kits, until in the end they were more glue than kit. And unknowingly, to me at the time, these movies did a number of things. Firstly, they inspired in me a love of music, and how music can tell a story, raise us and break us, pull our moods in different directions, and get us more involved in the world that the story is telling us. Secondly was history, and how it can be used as a backdrop to any tale that we are telling. And finally, storytelling. My love of these movies led me into wargaming and role-playing games. And even now, the opening scene of Where Eagles Dare has me spellbound. The music is awe-inspiring, and the Ju-52 coming out of the centre of the dark screen to roar overhead of the camera. Another is the 2017 film Dunkirk, with the scene Home Comes to Them. The play of music building the stress and pressure until it breaks into relief as the fleet of small craft appears is perfect. The Ju-52 from the opening of Where Eagles Dare, though, had me entranced as a child. I loved the aircraft. There was something about the design, the corrugated wings, the tri-motor design, its ability to get into and out of just about any situation. Yes, I was a true fan of the hard-working Iron Annie, and still am. But this script is about an earlier Junkers airframe that led up to the Second World War and how history has played out. The pre-World War II aircraft company, Junkers, was one of the world's most famous design and manufacturing companies of that period, and even up to its final merger with the MBB brand in the late 1960s. The aircraft I'm writing about today is the Junkers G24, a single-engined low-wing cabin monoplane. It was built upon the famous F-13 aircraft that I wrote about in the commercial low-wing monoplane, and that seems so long ago now. Hugo Junkers was an inspired engineer, but he was also a German engineer with a strong ethical stance on what was happening to Germany at the time. He could see the path that the nation was progressing along and did his best to walk a fine line between aircraft design, transportation, and not allowing his creations to be used for evil. That said, under the stresses imposed on Germany in the aftermath of the First World War, led to the need to find creative ways of carrying on business. For Junkers, that meant setting up shop in a suburb of Moscow for the production of the G24, with the first purchasers being the Soviet Union. There were embargoes set on Germany at the time on what could or could not be produced. This led to a sense of bitterness and laid the seeds for the Second World War, where the death toll was 4 times higher than that of the First World War. Within days of the F-13, the forerunner to the G-24, being announced to the world, the Military Inter-Allied Commission of Control put a stop on all German aircraft manufacture. Probably the worst act to be carried out post-World War was one of the blockade of 1919. With the war over and no sign of Germany agreeing to or signing the Treaty of Versailles, a naval blockade was placed on the nation. In effect, a siege that starved Germany into submission, the death toll of which was placed to be around 100,000 civilians already weakened by war, and the spread of diseases. In my opinion, as an armchair historian and someone who has dabbled in economics, having run businesses, the aftermath of the conflict was without a doubt some of the worst diplomacy that I've ever seen. The treatment of the nation was brutal, and the Carthaginian-style peace treaty led the way to far worse brutalities that still haunt the world. For a number of German companies, the best option was to find a method of working around the restrictions. Junkers, as I said, went to Russia. Dornier moved to the Swiss side of Lake Constance. And by the early to mid-1930s, Germany had a change in leadership, and the Treaty of Versailles was openly being ignored by everybody. Hugo Junkers would die under house arrest in 1935, aged 76, having refused to agree with or sign his company over to the Third Reich. The interwar period was dogged by politics, as one might well expect, but was also a time of two competing technologies. One, the airship, was doomed to fail, and the second was to rule the sky when it came to passenger travel. But it was her Junkers' work on metal-skinned aircraft that came to give us what we have today, with the F-13 and the G24 giving other people ideas for their designs, like the American Ford Trimotor and the Soviet Maxim Gorky, which at the time was the world's largest aircraft and was powered by 8 engines. The G24 would go on to serve with the German flag carrier Deutsche Luft Hansa, which was formed in 1926, and like many things ceased to operate in 1945. The name would harken back to the Hanseatic League operating out of northern Germany for much of the Middle Ages and controlling trade across the Baltic Sea. And the company would go on to do many firsts that other airliners would not complete, like being the first airline to fly at night regularly, something that in the 1930s no reasonably sane person would even contemplate. The birth of the company coincided with the lifting of the ban of civil air transport by the aforementioned Military Inter-Allied Commission of Control. And from the get-go, DHL, no, not that DHL, they weren't formed until 1969, they are part of Deutsche Post and one of the world's leading parcel logistics companies. Where was I? Yes. And from the get-go, DHL was able to expand into the vacuum that was the late 1920s, and oh boy did they expand. Trailing routes out into the Middle East, Russia. Remember that this was a period of pro-Soviet German relationships, and also South America, flying the Fokker-Wulf FW-200 Condor, a long-distance aircraft that at last could cross the Atlantic in one hop. It could even reach out to Tokyo with only one layover for refuelling. The 1930s saw the German grip over South America strengthen, as slowly they pushed against the French for control of mail routes. The attempt to fly mail to America was refused by the United States in opposition of the new German Nazi government under the control of a certain person. 1938 saw the company fly 19.3 million kilometres, transport over 250,000 passengers, and be the logistic powerhouse behind the transportation of 5,288 tonnes of mail. 6 years later, it was all over. Deutsche Luft Hansa, or what was left of it, was under the control of the Allied occupation of Germany, the modern version of the Military Inter-Allied Commission of Control, or post-World War I fame. Only this time, there'd be no blockade of Germany, no vendetta of they must pay for what they have done. In 1953, Lufthansa, the West German airline company and the flag carrier for the nation, came into power. And they claimed the history of DHL. Well, most of the history of DHL. There's a bit between 1939 and 1945 that they don't know anything about. But in 1955, Deutsche Luft Hansa came into existence and promptly told Lufthansa that they were the only Lufthansa there was. Based in East Germany, they had no intention of letting the nasty capitalist puppet government of West Germany win. At that point, West Lufthansa promptly sued East Lufthansa over the copyright of the name, and won. There was to be only one Lufthansa, and that would be the West one. As a minor side effect, and probably a nasty capitalist thing to do, East Lufthansa was banned from being admitted into the International Air Transport Association, which is a cartel-like organisation that controls our air travel, and oh boy do they have power. And all of this didn't matter in the early 1950s because the UN hadn't accepted either West or East Germany. So East Lufthansa couldn't join the International Civil Aviation Organization. Strangely, West Lufthansa was. Again, that's those nasty capitalists for you, always looking after their own best interests. The fight took 8 years, and in the end, Deutsche Lufthansa, East Germany, was superseded by the very communist-backed Interflug. Interflug didn't survive the reunification of Germany very well in the 1980s. I guess that when you can get nasty Western capitalist flights in aircraft built overseas, the idea of sitting in a Russian-built Tupolev Tu-134 doesn't quite have the same appeal. And when you sit in your very comfortable seat with the aircon operating, being served by your flight attendant, just remember that what you're doing has only been around for 100 years. The cabin crew will know if you smoke in the toilets, and it's better to ask for water at high altitude than a fizzy drink. But you sit in comfort thanks to the like of Hugo Junkers, who designed wonderful transport aircraft to carry people safely from A to B. So maybe raise a glass and say a quiet thank you for all the designers and all the test pilots, the people who did the foundation to get us to where we are now.